What up, YouTube? It's July the 21st, right now, 6:41 p.m. This is the official audio recording / analysis, sort of like a book report. You could say the book report about this chapter in the book, The Origins of an Islamic State. The chapter is called Al-Yemen. And they're basically talking about further conquest throughout, it's a country today, but basically throughout Yemen back then. So that would be about 1,400 years ago. There were like two places in Yemen that Muhammad had already conquered. And I always use the term conquered, but it wasn't no fight that was put up. It was pretty much annexed, and these people decided to agree upon Muhammad's terms. But all in all, it's still a part of the Islamic conquest, at least back then. The first town, one was called Tabala, and that's in eastern Yemen, southeastern Yemen. The other town was called Al-Juresh, which is in western Yemen, but it's also a part of the Sada region today. So those like the first two places that Muhammad had incorporated into, I'm going to use the term kingdom, to make it simple, into his overall Islamic kingdom back then. Another place that he had somewhat annexed was Najran, which is like right before this freaking chapter, and I did a really long audio recording about Najran and, what occurred there, and also the background Christian history as far as the introduction of Christianity there, and I included the Oxamites. But as far as the beginning of this chapter, before I go further, I kind of like want to give a visual description of the places in Yemen as far as the atlas is concerned that Muhammad put under the jurisdiction of quite a few people, when he was kind of like, grabbing up land here and there. But I also want to say, as far as like what they delineated in this book and the authors and the hadiths and all of that, they didn't mention anything about like an invasion. In other words, nobody really fought. In the beginning of this chapter, they did say, just like those of Najran, a lot of envoys from a lot of these places came to Muhammad and tried to have little peace talks or whatever and create terms with him, just like those two monks of Najran. And when I think about it, like I say, being at Al-Juresh and Tabala as well as Najran, like as far as proximity is concerned, that's close to Arabia. Two of those people, that's close to Yemen. Two of those places are in Yemen itself, one on each corner. Najran is basically north of Yemen, but it almost basically borders it because it's not really that far from Sada. Again, it's like 81 to 83 miles northeast of Sada. So just like, the other oases in Arabia going north past Mecca, word going to spread. You know what I mean? And it would be, and I would say it's inevitable as far as back then. It was inevitable that Muhammad was going to end up annexing those places as well. So it's like the people took that in mind and they decided to initiate peace talks with Muhammad before that happened. So no invasion as far as this chapter is concerned occurred. People basically just willingly, not necessarily gave in, but decided to build a relationship with Muhammad, even though, they would be sort of subjugated to a degree at least. So that's what occurred. In the beginning of this chapter, they talk about like people making moves to build diplomatic relations with Muhammad. Now, before I go further into it, like I say, I want to talk about the map of it. Okay, one place is called Zabad. Now, Zabad is also in southwestern Yemen, but it's south of Sada as well. It's basically at almost like the southwestern corner of it. It doesn't really border the Red Sea, but it's not really that far inland from the Red Sea either. And from a longitudinal, in terms of longitude, it's like directly across from northern Ethiopia and Somalia. So that's where you can find this place as I did at. Then there's another town called Eden. and is also in southwestern Yemen. But this town used to be a port town as well. But this town is kind of different from Zabid because it actually borders the Gulf of Eden, which is also directly south of Arabia. In other words, it's directly south of fucking Yemen. And it also pours or runs into the Indian Ocean, right? There's extra information. I mean, it's not really that relevant, but the Indian Ocean also borders South Africa also, so keep that in mind. So the Gulf of Eden runs into the Indian Ocean, but it's also a part of the Gulf Sea, which is northeast of Arabia, also bordering, or it's basically between northeastern Arabia and southwestern India, put it simply. Okay, so then there's another town which comes up in this book, and like I say, I'm going to go into the details of all these different towns and who basically was placed as they say governor, I say visor of these different towns in the regions. But there's another one called Al-Yemen. Now, visually speaking, think about Zabad or Zabid and Eden, and think about it like horizontally. Al-Yemen is basically like in the center of both of those towns, right? So from Zabid, it is like a little bit over 100 miles. From Eden, it is basically like 130 miles from that point. So look at it like this. You got Zabid, and then southeast of Zabid, you got Al-Yemen, 100 miles away, okay? Then you got Al-Yemen right there in the center, and then you got Eden. Eden is 130 miles away. So that means Al-Yemen would be 130 miles northwest of Eden. Right. Now, there's another town which is pretty close to, because the town I'm about to mention is called Qaryat Kahil. This town is not really too far from Al-Yemen, but you know, there's a tribe. Well, I get into that in a second. Basically, Qaryat Kahil is pretty much next or within proximity of Al-Yemen. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, go all the way east, damn near close to the eastern coast. All right, almost close to it. There's another region. It's not really a town, but it's like a vast desert-like region. And I'm going to assume within this region itself, you don't find too many areas that are verdant. In other words, you're not going to find too many oases there or places to where you get green vegetation. All right? Now, this is in Yemen, eastern Yemen. And it's at least 125,000 miles as far as the area that this region encompasses. All right? So, you know, look at it like 125,000 square miles, in other words. And it's called Hatramayut. All right? Google this shit and you look it up, you'll see it's pretty much highlighted. Then north of this town, or that place actually, not the town, but the north of that region, you got another area that's even more vast than that. It's called Rimal. ARIMAL. And what I found about, like, as far as like the vowel sounds and of a lot of Arabian words, is kind of similar to Latin. So I'm thinking that this pronounces Rimal. The vowel I having like a E type of sound or inflection to it. Same thing with A having like a ah type of sound to it. So it's Rimal. And again, that is directly north of this region in eastern Yemen called Hatramayut. But Rimal is at least 250,000 fucking square miles. It's like over 1,000 miles as far as, I think the length of it, the width is even greater. But altogether, it encompasses at least 250 fucking thousand miles, and it is not in Yemen, as I just said, but it's like at the southeastern corner of Arabia. but it also like includes like the northern portions of Yemen and also Oman, all right? Because Oman is east of Yemen. So Oman is actually at the fucking southeastern corner of Arabia. But not only does it include those, well, the northern parts of Yemen and Oman, but also to the northeast of it. You got another place today that's called the Arab Emirate. It includes portions of that region as well. So it's like Hadramaut is twice as fucking vast. Wait a minute, hold on. No, I'm fucking it up. No, our Rimal actually is twice as vast as Hadramaut. Right, so let me clarify that. Our Rimal is 250 fucking thousand miles square in diameter, and that's in southeastern Arabia. And then Hadramaut is at least 125,000 miles in diameter, and that's in Yemen. But the eastern portion of Yemen from fucking north to south, all right, taking up a fucking vast area there, but doesn't extend all the way to the coastal or the coastal portion of Yemen. Damn near, but not all the way. All right. So let me see. I think that's about it as far as the towns. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. There's another one that Muhammad mentioned, but I'm not sure like where exactly it is, and I'll get to that in a second. And if I'm missing another town, I'll pretty much highlight it before I get done with this. All right, now let me get into it. The first person that I want to mention that Muhammad gave or made or gave jurisdiction to, his name is Abu Musa ibn or Ashara. It depends on how his last name is pronounced. But it's basically Abu Musa ibn Ashara. Now, the interesting thing about him is that I had already read about him before, not just because his name is in my jargon, but during the whole conquest of Mecca that occurred in 630. All right? His name had came up. He had led a brigade also to fight against these people in Altus at the time. So I had read about him, a little bit of the background, his counterpart, what was his name? Amar Abu Ibn Ashara as well. But that guy had died. That's all I pretty much knew about Abu Musa. But, you know, when I reread about him, I found out something else that's interesting. That's way prior to this. Okay, during the whole revolution within the Quraysh tribe in Mecca, you know, he had converted to Islam also, at least by 614, right before Muhammad had made it out and went north to Medina. But when he had converted to Islam, you know, he went back to the place that he was from, which is Zabid, the town that I had just mentioned about 5 minutes ago. He went back there, but he maintained the Islamic faith. So he stayed there for about 14 years. 628, after Kabar had got conquered, when they got invaded, and as I already mentioned in one of my earlier blogs, and Sophia bint Huyay, you know, married Muhammad and all of this, and her husband had got killed as a part of this, as well as her brother and her father prior to that at the Battle of Al-Khandaq, blah, blah, blah. But around that time, that's when Abu Musa ibn Ashari had came back and re-linked up with Muhammad, but in Medina. See, the thing that's important about that I find to be interesting is that so-called he had at least 50 fucking followers with him. So that means when he went back to his native town of Zabad, he continued to preach that faith and accumulated that many people, at least while all this whole history leading up until 628 AD was going on. I didn't know that. I was like, okay, that's pretty insightful or whatever. So he himself, Muhammad had placed him as governor, but again, I say visor over Zabid, Eden, and then the other place that I had mentioned, which is in eastern Yemen, which is Hathramayut. So here's a guy that's ruling these towns on the western portion of it, but also all the way to the eastern portion of Yemen, damn near the coastal point in this vast region, okay? That's at least 125 fucking thousand miles in diameter. He was placed in control of that region or have a jurisdiction over the people there as well. Now, as far as Zabad is concerned, I'm like, okay, more than likely, like I say, you already had that seed planted there at least fucking 17 years before this. So even though he went to Medina after the fact and brought 50 people there, up to this point, at least in 631, you still had individuals that were at least aware of what Islam was. All right, and I'm excluding the whole not scenario, but the whole happening of Al-Juresh and Tabala. I'm talking about like even when you disregard that, the history of Abu Musa ibn Ashari there points to the fact that a seed was planted. So it makes sense that Muhammad would send him back to Zubayr and place him as visor over those people. So in my mind, I'm going to say for sure that they had converted by this time point into Islam. That's what I think about those people. Now, as far as Eden, they didn't really say too much about them. When I included Eden in my jargon, the only thing that came up is that, you know, it used to be like a seaport. And as far as biblical history is concerned, some people take the opinion that Adam and Eve may have been buried there somewhere. I'm not sure if that's really the case. I know, like, as far as what I read about Sanaya, the Sabians, and Yemen and all this type of stuff, like, you know, the tribe or the clan of Sheba is also synonymous with that region as far as the Sabians. All right, so these people all together, like I say, as far as them being collectively referred to as the ancient Quatanites, they're all considered people of the book. So that's all I can really point out as far as Eden is concerned. But going back to eastern Yemen, as far as Hathra Mayut, I'm like, okay, if that was a vast fucking desert region, in my mind, I'm looking at it like it's more so like a collection of different, I want to say neutral tribes and clans that don't necessarily, as far as my knowledge is concerned, that don't necessarily fit into like some type of fucking kingdom or confederation of clans. All right, so that area would be kind of like neutral compared to like a sedentary settlement, you know what I'm saying, within an oasis somewhere. So I'm thinking that's my understanding of that. All right, so that's the towns in this vast fucking area that Muhammad put Abu Musa ibn Ashari as the head of. Okay, there's another guy. His name is Ammar ibn Hazim. All right, and again, I'm only going slow because I got no choice but to do that right now. But his name is Ammar ibn Hazim. Not too much is said about him as far as his name, and aside from him being a companion, obviously, around this time during the life of Muhammad, but he was placed over the people in Najran. I had a little issue with that. I mean, they didn't really say too much beyond that. They didn't even denote him as being a governor. They just said, like, he was placed over the people there. But also Abu Sufyan, all right, the former head of the Quraysh tribe, you know, who also got captured during this whole conquest of Mecca. I don't need to go into that again, but he did convert forcibly, but he converted, so he wouldn't get killed. But, you know, he did maintain his position there in Mecca after the fact also. But the northern portion of Najran was given to him. Now, I'm gonna put him on hold for now, and I want to talk about Ammar ibn Hazim. The reason why I had like a little issue with that, because right before this chapter, you know, like I say, the terms that was officiated between Muhammad and the people of Najran basically pointed to the fact that they would be able to maintain their autonomy. So in other words, they did not have to convert to Islam. As far as the eternal mechanisms of their society is concerned, You know, like if you had like a civilian chief or a military officer, a priest, etc., anybody with some type of titles like that, they got to maintain that and not be, it wouldn't be changed. You know, like somebody of the Islamic persuasion couldn't come into their society and jeopardize or modify anything. Of course, they had to, you know, pay their payments to Muhammad and stuff like that. But as far as like the way that their society operated internally speaking, they got to maintain that and they didn't have to convert. So in other words, there was no real governor placed over these people, some type of visor or fucking supervisor of the sort. You know what I'm saying? So when they mention Ammar ibn Hazim, I'm thinking like, okay, more than likely, he was probably just a meal. Because this is not even like 5 years later, definitely not 2 years later. This is all during the time of Muhammad. All right, so if it's not like the end of 631 AD, it's definitely the early stages of 632. So again, not even a 4 solid year had went past, because you got to take it. Well, I had to take into account that when these terms was created or initiated between the people of Najran and Muhammad, it was in June of 631. All right, so I don't think a sudden change will happen that quick, only because additional areas throughout the whole of Yemen were being conquered and annexed. So my take on it is that Ammar ibn Hazim was more so just a mill, a person that collected what he needed to collect. That's it. Now, going back to Abu Sufyan, the Christians that had that conversation with Muhammad, they were Nestorian Christians. But as far as the people in northern Najran, I'm not sure who they were. So I'll leave a little room for a possibility that maybe they had like a different type of stipulation. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of like my take on it. And I will explain further why that's the case in a second. So I'm going to leave that open for a possibility. But as far as like the people within Najran itself and Ammar ibn Hazim being placed over those people, I don't know. I'm gonna say that he was more so like some type of meal. So that's the significance of that part of Yemen. You know, being I don't even want to say next, but you know, as far as the history of this time period concerning Najran and Zabid and Eden and Hathara, my youth, is concerned. Now I'm gonna go to somebody else who was not given land, but was placed, you know, having some type of jurisdiction over certain land in Yemen. Because there's a couple more of them. There's another guy named Mu'ath ibn Jabal. Now, I'm going to go into the history of him real quick. Because he got like a long and planted-like history also. He became Islamic way before this major conquest had started happening. And he was like one of Muhammad's best fucking associates, religious associates, all right? Now, there's like this phrase called the second Aqaba, which is really just like a journey to the Kaaba, a pilgrimage. That's all it really was. Now, he becomes significant in that era, so it's like 622 AD around this time. What had happened is that like group of people, at least 70-something people altogether at least, you know, they wanted to make this pilgrimage to Mecca, but they had to do it discreetly, you know, without unveiling who they were religiously speaking, which also adds to my other theories about, you know, why Umar did not practice Islam openly in Mecca after 616, but prior to 622. I ain't going to get into all that right now. But basically, you know, they had to go back and they wanted to worship the Kaaba or pray toward the Kaaba, but again, they had to do it like under the guise of being polytheists. So everybody pretty much met in Mecca, but they had to do it secretly, and when they met, you know, Muhammad's uncle, Al-Abbas ibn al-Muttalib, you know, he was talking about how the answers took care of Muhammad or whatever, but he was pretty much expressing his concern over his nephew's safety. And within this little conversational dialogue also, he did repeat that he was not officially Islamic, even by this time period also, which also validates one of my little, theories about him never being fucking Islamic in the get-go prior to 624. But that's another subject. But he did point it out that he wasn't officially Islamic yet. So he's basically expressing his concern over his nephew's safety. Now, Mu'adh ibn Jabal was a part of this group, so they did make, they pledged to protect Muhammad in case something broke out. So they did make this journey into Mecca, and they did become successful during this pilgrimage of worshiping the Kaaba. So he goes back at least that far, but even beyond that. So that's like a little additional information as far as him, as he is concerned. But the town called Al-Yemen that I mentioned, he was placed as the head of those people. Now, they did get specific as far as his title is concerned. He was appointed by Muhammad personally as a Qazi. Now, I'm like, I already know what Qazi means only because of Ibn Battutta's book and what I read as far as in Abu Layton and the Qazi that he meant there. Again, a Qazi is just like the head of administration, which also includes being a judge, but at the same time an Islamic scholar. And it does make sense to me that he will be appointed as a Qazi because, again, he was one of Muhammad's closest associates as far as religion is concerned. In fact, the place that I'm about to mention in a second called Zur-Ah, Muhammad, when he wrote a letter to those people, he referred to Mu'adh ibn Jabal as one of his quote-unquote co-religious, all right? So, again, it makes sense to me that he will make him the Qazi of Al-Yemen, which means he was a head of administration there, but he also taught the people how to properly go about as far as being Islamists. So from that standpoint, I'm looking at it like, okay, one can definitely say the people of Al-Yemen were Islamists. Just to reiterate real quick, and like I say, I talk like I'm talking to an audience, so I ain't going crazy. But just to reiterate, Al-Yemen is over 100 miles south east of Zabid. Over 130 fucking miles north west of Eden, right? There in the center, when you look at the map, that is the positioning of the town there, all right? So, again, Mu'adh ibn Jabal was placed as the Qazi there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and mention that town that I just, because I'm not going to skip to somebody else and then bring it back to him, so I'm just going to keep everything related to him and his significance during this chapter. Later on, there was a group of people, basically a group of people that was referred to as Zur-Ah. Now, Z-U-R-A-H. I tried to look this up. I looked it up. I could not find where this is at and who these people were. But they did give hints. So I got like little suggestions in my head as to where these people may have been located at. But, based on other things that was written in this chapter, I'm not 100% sure about that. Now, Mu'adh ibn Jabal was sent to these people. Muhammad had wrote a letter, and then he sent him to these people to convey this message to them. Now, within this letter, Muhammad told them about how they would have to pay a sadaqah. But the payments of their sadaqah, just like the people of Kabar and elsewhere, Muhammad and his relatives personally would not benefit off of it. It would benefit the Muslim populations and the wayfarers, the poor Muslim populations and the wayfarers. It wasn't paid directly to Muhammad for his benefit as a tyrant. That's how he wrote the letter. So he was instructing the people to collect their sadaqahs and everything and then give it to Mu'adh ibn Jabal. But he also gave them a compliment. Now, this is where, I'm not 100% sure where these people at. I'm kind of thinking it could be a certain area, a certain town I'm about to mention in a second. But again, I will say why I'm not sure that's the case either. But he gave him a compliment. He said he appreciated the fact that they were some of the first that embraced Islam and then deserted the Himyarites. Now, to me, I'm going to pause right there for a second. I was a little confused about it because I'm like, damn, the Himyarites, okay. You know, based on what I read about them, especially the last chapter with the Oxumites and this whole Christian genocide that happened from the Himyarites toward the Christians in Najran, the last Himyarite king, which was Yusuf ibn Tamar,